Committee Room 30, signed. 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 Committee Room 30, Committee Room 30, signed. 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 Committee Room 30, Committee Room 30. Signed. 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 Committee Room 30. Committee Room 30, signed. 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 Committee Room 30, Committee Room 30, signed. 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 Committee Room 30, Committee Room 30, signed. 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 Committee Room 30, Committee Room 30. Sound. 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 Committee Room 30. Sound.
If I could, we have a quorum. So can I declare the meeting open to the public? Can I welcome members to the 74th meeting of the Committee for Justice? Can I advise members that the committee meeting will be recorded and broadcast throughout Parliament buildings and online? Can I advise members that those in the public gallery that they are welcome to use mobile devices as long as they are in airplane mode and all devices are muted? Attendees can also connect to the Wi-Fi, assembly Wi-Fi, and password details are available on the gallery rules. It is not permitted to take photographs or record any part of the meeting. Can I advise members that it is proposed that the oral evidence session with the Department, the PSNI and the PPS on child criminal exploitation and the session with RAISE on the sentencing bill will be recorded by Hansard. So can I seek your agreement for this to happen? Agreed?
Agreed.
Can I remind members that they are obliged to declare any financial or other relevant interests that might reasonably be thought by others to influence their approach to the matter under consideration. Any members who have interest to declare in relation to the day's business should do so now or when the particular matter arises. So can I ask, have members anything to declare?
Just the membership of the APG.
Okay, yep. I think that's a sweeping one for us all with regards to the APG, the membership. Okay, moving on then is agenda item number apologies. We have received apologies from Patsy McGlowan and Aoife, wasn't it? Aoife?
Yeah.
Any members have any other apologies? I think that's maybe us all now. Can I advise members that committee members Ciara Ferguson and Doug Beattie are attending the meeting virtually and are on the screen. Agenda item number 2 then. Draft minutes. Can I inform members that the draft minutes of the meeting held on Thursday the 7th of May 2026 are at pages 5 to 14 of the meeting pack? Can I ask members if they are content that the minutes are a true reflection of the proceedings of the meeting held on the 7th of May?
Content.
If so, then I will sign. Agreed?
Agreed.
Okay, matters arising. Agenda item number 3. Can I ask members if there are any matters arising for the minutes they wish to raise at this point? No. Okay, agenda item number 4 then is an inspection of child criminal exploitation in Northern Ireland, Department of Justice, PSNI and PPS joint oral evidence. Can I refer members to pages 15 to 120 of the meeting pack for the relevant papers? Can I remind members that at its meeting on the 26th of February 2026, the committee considered Sagini's first inspection report into child criminal exploitation in Northern Ireland. The committee agreed to hear oral evidence from Sejini on the report and held a separate joint evidence session with officials from the Department of Justice, the PPS and the PSNI on the report and other matters around child criminal exploitation. At its meeting on the 19th of March, the committee heard evidence on the findings of the report from Sejini, who advised that whilst child criminal exploitation was recognised as a growing concern, the criminal justice system faced significant challenges in recognising, assessing and responding to it. The committee heard that at a strategic level there was no agreed criminal justice system-wide framework to baseline responses, monitor outcomes or measure success. So can I inform members that today the committee is receiving oral evidence on the report from the Department of Justice, the PPS and the PSNI. Can I inform members that the witnesses providing evidence today, Graham Walker, Head of International Crime Justice Corporation DOJ, Colleen Cartwright, Policy Officer DOJ, Ellis McGrath, Assistant Director Belfast Region PPS, Davy Beck, Assistant Chief Constable PSNI and Zoe McKee, Detective Superintendent PSNI. Hope I've got everyone right there. Can I welcome you all to the Justice Committee and can I invite you to make an opening statement? Thank you.
Thank you for the opportunity to make this opening statement. You've already noted that I am joined today by colleagues from PSNI and PPS, so I won't reprise those introductions. I'm joined for the department by Colleen Cartwright, the department's policy lead on child exploitation. Police and prosecution colleagues would also wish to make remarks on behalf of their organisation, so I will keep my own comments brief. I welcome the opportunity to speak about the important issue of child criminal exploitation, or CCE. The department welcomes both the recent Sejini inspection on CCE and the follow-up review inspection on child sex exploitation, which identified many similar themes and challenges. These forms of exploitation exist on a continuum of overlapping harms. They are complex forms of child abuse, and it is essential that children who are groomed, coerced or manipulated into criminal activity are treated first and foremost as victims in need of protection and support, not unnecessarily criminalised. The department is fully committed to ensuring that our response is consistent, trauma-informed and child-centred. I am pleased that Sejini recognised the significant cross-governmental progress made in recent years, particularly in relation to CCE. Tackling child criminal exploitation cannot be the responsibility of criminal justice agencies alone and requires a coordinated whole system response. The department has worked closely with the Departments of Health and Education alongside operational partners to strengthen Northern Ireland's response to CCE. This work led to the development of a formal definition of child criminal exploitation for Northern Ireland and the launch of a 2-year CCE action plan, jointly launched by the Ministers of Justice, Health and Education in September 2024. Together, these provide the foundation for a coordinated approach that improves awareness and identification, strengthens prevention, enhances safeguarding pathways and supports the disruption of those who exploit children. Within that plan, the Department of Justice has clear responsibilities. We are increasing awareness of relevant offences under the Human Trafficking and Exploitation Act, contributing to new practitioner guidance developed by the Safeguarding Board for Northern Ireland, and preparing for the introduction of new offences that will strengthen our ability to disrupt those who exploit children. This includes a new bespoke offence of child criminal exploitation alongside CCE prevention orders, which will shortly be implemented in Northern Ireland. The department also plays a central role in strategic oversight as co-chair of the cross-departmental Children and Young People Strategy Child Protection Group. Another important step forward has been the creation of a dedicated CCE professional officer within the Safeguarding Board, jointly funded by the Departments of Justice and Health. This role is already providing vital in driving delivery across the safeguarding system, maintaining action behind that action plan and supporting frontline practitioners. Alongside this work, the department continues to strengthen victim identification because, quite simply, unless children are identified as victims, they cannot be properly supported. The National Referral Mechanism, the UK's framework for identifying victims of exploitation, is central to this effort. Working in partnership with the Department of Health, we introduced a Northern Ireland pilot to devolve decision-making for child victims of modern slavery and child exploitation. This means decisions can now be made locally, more quickly, and by safeguarding professionals who understand the child's circumstances rather than solely through the Home Office system. The pilot went live in January this year and has already generated an increased number of referrals. We believe that this will make a significant difference in strengthening awareness, improving recognition and enhancing decision-making in child exploitation cases. Importantly, we are already seeing evidence of improved identification. In 2025, 24 local children were identified as being exploited in Northern Ireland, compared with just 5 in 2024. It's an increase of 375%. While those figures are deeply concerning, they also demonstrate that more children are now being recognised, formally identified, supported and protected. Crucially, it also means fewer children risk being unnecessarily criminalised. Turning specifically to the Sejini inspection, the Department welcomes the findings, which provide valuable insight into where progress has been made, but also where challenges remain. It's important, however, to recognise that the inspection reflects the system as it existed during the fieldwork stage, which took place during the early implementation of the action plan. Since then, further progress has already been made, including the development of a new practitioner guidance by the Safeguarding Board to support frontline responses to CCE. The report makes 2 strategic and 2 operational recommendations. The Department fully accepts Strategic Recommendation 1 directed to DOJ and partners, which calls for the development of a strategic framework to baseline how the justice system responds to CCE and to establish indicators and monitoring mechanisms for outcomes. Work is already underway to address this recommendation. Officials are working closely with justice partners, including through the establishment of a new Criminal Justice Child Exploitation Forum. This forum will deliver a consistent child-first framework across the system, improve data and oversight, and strengthen how we assess and monitor outcomes for children affected by exploitation. Importantly, it will also provide a mechanism for criminal justice organisations to collectively address challenges, identify opportunities for improvement, monitor the effectiveness of the justice system response, and escalate issues for strategic resolution by senior justice leaders where required. The forum will consider all forms of child exploitation, including both criminal and sexual exploitation. Terms of reference, Chair, have already been agreed, and the first meeting took place on the 1st of May. The next phase of work will involve a series of round-table workshops, the first intended to be held by the end of June to drive this work forward. In closing, Chair, the Department is committed to ensuring that the Sejini findings meaningfully inform the next phase of our work. Child criminal exploitation does not exist in isolation. It is often linked to organised crime, paramilitarism and multiple overlapping forms of abuse and exploitation. It presents a significant challenge for the criminal justice system and for wider society. The Department fully accepts the recommendations made. Work is already progressing, and we remain firmly focused on ensuring that children affected by exploitation can be identified, protected and properly supported across the justice system. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Graham. Just before we pass on, can I ask you to go through those figures again? 5 children identified in 2025, I think you said?
5 local children in 2024.
2020.
Yeah.
2024, 5 local children identified.
2025.
And then what was the increase then in figure? I know it was a 375% increase.
24 were identified local victims in 2025.
Right, okay, 24 and 25. Sorry for the confusion there. Okay, thank you. Who's up next then?
Okay. Chair, members of the committee, again, thank you for the opportunity to appear before the committee today, alongside colleagues from the Department of Justice and the Public Prosecution Service, to discuss this really important issue in terms of child criminal exploitation. And as you say, I'm joined today by Detective Chief Superintendent Zoe McKee, who is our Head of Public Protection Branch. Again, at the outset, I would want to acknowledge the findings and the recommendations contained within the Criminal Justice Inspection Northern Ireland report into child criminal exploitation. I think the report is both important and indeed very timely. It highlights the complexity of this form of abuse. It identifies areas where improvements are required across the criminal justice system, and it reinforces the need for coordination in terms of that safeguarding response. We in the PSNI welcome the scrutiny and the opportunity to continue to strengthen our service-wide response in that regard. Increasingly, we are seeing exploitation linked to organised criminality, coercion into drug supply, online offending, intimidation and violence. In Northern Ireland, we also recognise the particular challenges associated with organised crime networks and community-based coercive control. Importantly, children who are exploited are victims first and foremost, So we need to do more to ensure that those children are seen, heard and safeguarded appropriately, while those responsible for exploiting them are identified, disrupted and held to account. The inspection rightly identifies that it is not an issue for policing that can solve alone. Effective safeguarding requires a whole system response involving policing, justice agencies, health, education, safeguarding partners, local communities and indeed the voluntary sector. Over recent years, we in the Police Service of Northern Ireland have significantly strengthened our strategic and operational focus on exploitation, but we recognise that more can and indeed should be done to improve our policing response. We have formally adopted the cross-departmental definition of child criminal exploitation and are embedding that operationally across the service. Enhanced governance arrangements are now in place through a dedicated child exploitation delivery group led by Detective Chief Superintendent McKee, who's with me today, with reporting and accountability through established Northern Ireland Policing Board performance arrangements. We are also strengthening our data recording and identification processes, introducing bespoke person flags to better identify children at risk and ensure exploitation indicators and national referral mechanism considerations are more clearly recognised. Training and awareness activity is also being expanded significantly. An organisational wide e-learning package is under development, and child criminal exploitation is now being incorporated into foundation training for new officers, but also across investigative development programmes and specialist child abuse training. Alongside safeguarding partners and academic colleagues, including Queen's University in Belfast, we are also improving our analytical understanding of exploitation and strengthening our ability to map exploitation networks, identify adults who groom and exploit children, and better understand that contextual safeguarding risks within communities, and I think that's absolutely vital. Operational policing continues to respond to significant safeguarding demand. Child exploitation in all its forms remain a core policing priority. The complexity in responding to this crime type requires that balance between safeguarding responsibility, enforcement activity and the best interests of the child at all times. We fully acknowledge that there is more work to be done, particularly around recognising exploitation, consistency of approach, data maturity, prevention and that longer term safeguarding outcomes. We also recognise the wider strategic challenge. At present there is no current standalone child criminal exploitation legislation in Northern Ireland, and this presents some operational and evidential challenges across the wider system. Notwithstanding those challenges, there is significant work underway across policing and partner agencies to strengthen that prevention, improve identification and enhance the disruption activity to better protect children from harm. Finally, I want to recognise the professionalism and commitment of officers, staff and indeed safeguarding partners working daily in this really demanding and difficult area, often supporting some of the most vulnerable children in our society, while also operating under considerable workforce and resource pressures. And I certainly welcome the opportunity to assist the committee today, and I'm happy to take questions at the appropriate time.
You do it?
Thank you, Chair and committee members, for the invitation to attend the committee hearing this afternoon. The PPS welcomes the Criminal Justice Inspectorate report on child criminal exploitation and the new cross-departmental definition developed by the Departments of Justice, Health and Education, particularly the engagement with children and young people to reflect lived experience in Northern Ireland. While the definition is recent, the behaviours associated with CCE are unfortunately not new. The PPS has long dealt with cases involving the exploitation of children and young people by adults, organised groups and peers for criminal purposes. Increasingly, however, there is recognition that CCE must be treated not only as a criminal justice issue, but also a safeguarding issue, with the best interests of the child at the centre of decision making. For the PPS, the best interest of the child principle is embedded within our statutory obligations and prosecutorial decision making. Prosecutors are required to consider not only the offence itself, but also the child's welfare, vulnerability, background circumstances, and any exposure to trauma, coercion, intimidation, or exploitation. In some cases, children appearing before the courts as suspects may themselves be victims of exploitation. This requires prosecutors to exercise professional curiosity and to work closely with investigators and safeguarding partners to understand the full context of a child's circumstances, including vulnerabilities linked to adverse childhood experiences, family instability, educational disengagement, mental health difficulties, peer pressure, social exclusion, or paramilitary influence. At the same time, adults who recruit, groom, or exploit children for criminality must be held fully accountable. The PPS has dedicated human trafficking SPPs in our serious crime unit. It also has dedicated youth prosecutors across all PPS regions who specialise in youth justice matters and regularly work with PSNI youth diversion officers and Youth Justice Agency in cases involving vulnerable children and young people. Alongside this specialist work, training and guidance are being developed across the wider organisations so that all prosecutors are equipped to recognise indicators of exploitation and safeguarding concerns. A range of diversionary options remain available to avoid unnecessary criminalisation of children where appropriate, while supporting rehabilitation and safeguarding outcomes. The PPS is working closely with the Department of Justice and criminal justice partners to strengthen the collective response to CCE. We are represented on both the Criminal Justice Child Exploitation Forum and the implementation group preparing for commencement of the new provisions within the Crime and Policing Act, including the specific offence of child criminal exploitation, prevention orders, and the offence commonly known as cuckooing. This work includes developing training, guidance, and operational readiness across the criminal justice system. The introduction of a specific CCE offence will also improve data collection and understanding of the scale of offending. The PPS also supports the wider multi-agency approach through our involvement on the Child Exploitation Committee alongside PSNI and the Safeguarding Board for Northern Ireland. While significant work remains, there has been important progress in recognising CCE as a safeguarding issue arising from child abuse rather than solely a matter of criminality. The PPS will continue working collaboratively with criminal justice and safeguarding partners to improve outcomes for children and young people, while ensuring those responsible for exploiting children are brought to justice. Ultimately, our shared objective must be to protect vulnerable young people from exploitation and ensure the voice and welfare of the child remain central to the justice system. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Graham, David and Ellis, for that. I'm going to put it out to members now. Connie?
Yeah, thank you all for coming in today. It's obviously a really serious issue. I can't think of anything that's, as important as this, child criminal exploitation. And obviously the CGI report didn't have some good findings in there. The delivery of the criminal justice response to child criminal exploitation was found to be inconsistent and in many respects inadequate, and that's children who were letting down there. Something I was really concerned about when the CGI came in was the figures that were referred to the National Referral Mechanism. So in a 10-year period, I'm trying to get them in front of me here, we saw that there was tens of thousands of referrals made in the UK, but in Northern Ireland there was 4 over a 10-year period. And I just was wondering if you had any explanation for why there is such a huge disparity there.
Yeah, well, first I would say that we're absolutely fully committed to the protection of children, and we take seriously the issues raised in this report. I think, as Elish has said, child abuse is nothing new to us in Northern Ireland. I think what is new is the framing around CSE and then more so and more recently CCE. I think it's also recognised that within the NRM framework, it perhaps is not as reflective as it should be in terms of the Northern Ireland situation, and I think that was an issue for us in terms of both the interpretation, the use and the maximisation of the NRM process. I think the pilot that Graham referenced is a mechanism to, if you like, Northern Irelandise our considerations, our viewpoint, and as a consequence our identification and referral of young people into the model. And I think that is showing signs of early response to a more bespoke mechanism as opposed to what was the initial position around NRM. So I think you're absolutely right. We need to do better. We should do better. But I would say that this does not say that safeguarding was not being identified and addressed. Referrals were still being made in terms of social services, YDO or youth diversion officers, and that child-centred approach was still there, but specific to NRM methodology, we perhaps weren't fully aligned in terms of that. But I don't know, Zoe, if you want to add anything further to that.
Yeah, I think I think with the pilot itself, we're going to see significant changes there, because we now have a better depth of understanding in terms of the local issues, and with having the local panels and the assessment and the discussion for those agents who know that child best before it is even considered by Home Office in terms of sort of conclusive findings. Then I think it can only bring much more improvements that we need. But I think when you look at some of the stats there that Graham, our Department of Justice colleagues, have referenced, we are seeing in the very short space of time that the pilot has been running since January of this year, significant increases in referrals.
Could you explain then, just from my own knowledge, why beforehand, I think, you correct me if I'm wrong, you alluded to, it maybe wasn't aligned as well with Northern Ireland, and could you maybe explain that a bit more for me?
What I would say is the NRM was very much aligned to human trafficking and modern slavery type referrals, as opposed to that more nuanced coercive control, which I think the Criminal Justice Inspector acknowledges as well within the report around the nuances around that. So it probably wasn't interpreted in the same way as the mechanisms were established and set up for, which was primarily around human traffic and modern slavery, as opposed to what we tend to see in Northern Ireland, which is more linked to paramilitary influence and community coercive control. So I think it's that differential, if that helps to explain that.
I think just to add to that, I think the lack of awareness of the applicability of the NRM at that time was a key factor, and I think as we're all agreed, the pilot, now that's working on a devolved basis, we really are expecting it to make a significant difference in terms of raising awareness, strengthening awareness, and allowing practitioners to recognise that the NRM is actually an applicable tool for CCE cases.
Thank you. Another concern I really had was a point that was maybe raised that children are entering into the justice system and potentially appearing before the courts as suspects, when in reality they're victims of exploitation. Have you done any work on how many children you think that has been the case for? How any further interventions that were made for those children? Because being before the courts and entering into that criminal justice system can have a huge impact on their future, but also their well-being, especially if they're being treated as suspects when they're the victims.
It can be a very difficult balance and a very difficult concept to grasp, but we do have youth specialists who are used to working with young offenders and work within the Youth Justice Agency partners and the youth justice system to actually gather that information. And that does become part of what is our decision making. So we work very closely with police, particularly the YDOs, who usually have a very good idea of what's going on in the community for that child as well, and in the home. So quite often that information will be available to us, and it factors into what is ultimately our decision making as well.
And what I would add from a policing perspective in that regard, so our youth diversion officers, or YDOs, have been in place for a long time. It's well established, and every potential prosecution of a person under 18 goes through the YDO process. And that's our attempt not to criminalise people and to try to look at the wider issues. Works very well in terms of that liaison and collaboration with the Youth Justice Agency, and certainly that process continues, as Eilidh says, to inform the prosecution decisions and try to minimise those as much as possible, looking at other mechanisms for disposals rather than courts, which is ultimately the kind of last resort in many of those cases. I think what the Sugini report identifies is that some of those, again, more nuanced if you like, drivers or push-pull factors around people ending up in a situation where they are perhaps being investigated for a crime weren't fully recognised, acknowledged and further investigated in terms of that wider exploitation of young people. That's the element that I think the report highlights, and that's the work that collectively we're committed to doing.
How's the PSNI's work in the last 2 years really in identifying people who are exploiting children? And I'm as you said, there's going to be links to paramilitary organisations, and how has that work been progressing, and has that improved in the last few years?
Maybe that work's now been led by Zoe, so maybe that Zoe.
Yes, I can pick that up. So I think what we've done is, what we're pivoting to doing is recognising that fundamentally it's a safeguarding issue first and foremost, and not an enforcement issue. And I think the definition in terms of the wider action plan has been really helpful, because we've had to start from actually baselining and having a clear definition that all partner agencies actually understand, so that's the baseline that we then work from. So in having that definition published in late 2024, early in 2025, we embarked on setting up a delivery and a CE, a child exploitation, incorporating child sexual exploitation and criminal exploitation. So we set up a delivery group in terms of embedding and implementing that. And at that same time, we were actually the subject of review by the Criminal Justice Inspectorate. So as we were building our response and what our model would look like, we were also simultaneously being inspected. So some of the fantastic work that we have been doing and have been building on in all of last year and into this year, like our definition and embedding it across the organisation, developing the e-learning package, embedding it in all of our training, we're doing an initiative with Twin Site North with Dr. Colin Walsh, and his research is really informative, but we're building that in terms of some of the network analysis at the local level. So we know that child criminal exploitation happens in pockets of areas, it's not in certain communities. So we're building an evidence base in terms of trying to understand where those problem areas are, and then targeting our resources accordingly. And then some of our vulnerability leads at local level, they are the key people who are engaging with those children on the ground. And then we're trying to actually then build a culture with our own officers as well, because it's also a change in mindset across the board, because we have to acknowledge the findings of the Criminal Justice Inspectorate in terms of we haven't always got it right. You know that from the dip sampling in terms of identification, response and disruption. So we're building that culture whereby we look beneath just the criminal offence. We're also looking towards what is the vulnerability, what is the picture behind that individual child, and what the needs are, and how we then use the services, and then more broadly how we dock in and work more collaboratively with our safeguarding partners. For example, the Safeguarding Board for Northern Ireland, they've developed a fantastic practitioner guidance document that's been rolled out as well, and that's not just for policing but for all of our partners. So it's within, and then it's hugely without in terms of building on the good work that's happening as part of the action plan as well.
Thank you. Can I just pick up some of those things that Connie was exploring there? With the PPS, can I ask, Ellis, when you identify a child who is flagged as child criminal exploited through criminal means, you're there to obviously assess the prosecutionary factors in that case, but is there a flow of information then that goes back down the chain to the PSNI with regards to evidence that you might get at that point with regards to the exploitation of that child, in order that there would be a new investigation commence, irrespective of what you do with that child with regards to the criminal justice system?
So professional curiosity could lead us to actually contact the IDO or the YDO to ask questions. Maybe we have some suspicions in relation to the evidence that we have in front of us, but we have to acknowledge our criminal justice partners, because quite often they're actually identifying it first as an issue or a potential. And actually, as part of the CSE criminal justice inspection, there was a recommendation about a flag, which we now have on the PIF the prosecutor information sheet that actually specifically asks the officers to comment whether there is any exploitation that they suspect. So it would be part of our professional curiosity, and we would of course go back to the investigators to ask if there's any further information that they can glean for us in that regard. And I think also, just as a wee bit of reassurance, we do have dedicated youth specialists that have worked in this area for years, both as senior public prosecutors and as public prosecutors, who have very, very good links with the YDOs and also the Youth Justice Agency. So the flow of information is usually quite solid, and there's absolutely no difficulty in lifting the phone and saying, I have a wee bit of a concern in relation to this case. So we find that the communication between the criminal justice partners is very effective.
Thank you. Brian?
Thank you, Chair, and thank you all for your attendance and for your actions to implement this important report. Could I just get clarification? I think, Graham, you mentioned child criminal exploitation as a new offence. Has that come into effect, or is that in a current bill or a future bill?
It is in the Crime and Policing Act, which received royal assent, I think, about
29th of April.
Fortnight ago.
Yeah.
Right.
So implementation, commencement and implementation is intended around the end of the year.
At the end of the year, yeah. We're in the sort of implementation phase. We've got together a partnership group with the likes of PPS, PSNI, to look at the different work streams in order to commence that new offence and those prevention orders, so things like court rules that need written, and training and awareness, etc. So, like Graham said, we're hoping that will be commenced by the end of the year.
Okay, so that will enable the prosecution of adults guilty of CCE?
Yeah.
And when you said earlier, Graham, figures of 5 and 24 in the last 2 years, that was children identified as being criminally exploited.
Local victims of child exploitation,
but without an offence currently for adults, or you might, or is there an offence that adults can be charged with?
They could be charged under modern slavery human trafficking offences, although we do know historically that has been a challenge. So that is part of the reason why the CC offence was being extended from the Crime and Policing Bill, was to address that gap.
Okay.
Certainly, if it helps, sorry, through the chair, but we will look at the broad range of offences. So if there are actual offending offences, contact offences, or whatever in respect of that adult against that children, we will still prosecute for those. But what this addresses is perhaps that gap in legislation around that overall coercive control of the child, as opposed to a specific offence of assault, sexual assault, or whatever the case may be. So it adds to the armoury, if you like, in terms of available offences that we can consider in the broader sense.
And I would reiterate that actually, so it would be what we would look to, and it will be another offence which we could potentially direct as a prosecution. But at the moment, offences such as child cruelty or aiding and abetting, and there are various other offences that can be used presently, but this certainly will be a welcome addition.
Yeah, and it also just highlights the specific issue, of child exploitation. Which
will also assist with the recommendation in relation to the data maturity that you mentioned, very clearly for the purposes of pulling through the numbers, etc.
Yeah. Well, coming on to the numbers, when you said, Davy, earlier about increasing incidents of, to clarify what you said, was it increasing incidents of child criminal offences, or you said these are rising? Is that because of better identification, or do you feel there is a rise in children being involved in criminal activities, whether exploited or not? No,
I don't necessarily see it as a rise in the number of children involved in the behaviour. I think it's a rise in the awareness around some of the drivers behind that, and it speaks to the point we discussed earlier in terms of historically we may have looked at those as the children offending, whereas now it is more looking at holistically in terms of the drivers behind that. And recognises that coercive control, I think, more clearly in respect of our considerations. So I think that's a sign of the awareness raising that Zoe and others have mentioned here today.
Okay. Well, I want to ask a question building on that, about where this approach leads to. Do we end up considering all child criminal activity as child criminal exploitation, or do we recognise that in some cases the child is responsible, for their criminal activity, and we have the sentencing bill in front of us, which talks about the purposes of sentencing being punishment, protection of the public, deterrence, rehabilitation of offenders, and reparation for victims. So, rehabilitation should always be an aim in justice and in sentencing. But do we end up almost implying that children aren't responsible when they take part in crime? Obviously, this is specifically where they're being exploited. But is there recognition that not all child criminal activity is exploitation?
Absolutely, and I think we'd have to make that clear. We still see many examples where children have made a decision to offend, whether that's against us as police officers, or indeed against the public, or indeed against other children. So mindful of that, there are still that requirement to address that behaviour. I think we have the mechanisms to address that behaviour through YDO, through the prosecution services and the expertise that we have there to identify those. I think what this does is also look at the wider drivers for crime, and the wider causational factors around crime, and addresses some of those. So I think it puts a bit of balance back into the considerations around child offending, responsibility for that, but accepts that adults may have had a role in getting us to that point, which I think brings us back to the requirement for us all to be child-centred in terms of those considerations, and think more broadly in terms of what has brought us to that point. So I think it's a natural extension of what we have been working in development towards over a long number of years, and I think it's a maturing approach around that. But I think there are also risks in terms, as you kind of allude to, in not recognising that there is also children who offend, and actually by addressing that offending, I think we're also supporting those young people.
No, you're wanting them to turn their lives
Absolutely.
around,
Absolutely.
And rehabilitation. And last question, just in terms of where there's parental failure or lack of responsibility, and social services might be getting involved. Maybe that's not quite exploitation, but that quite often is a factor. Do social services have a role in the forum that you were talking about?
Go ahead.
I was just going to say, in terms of the Justice Forum, the Child Exploitation Justice Forum, we obviously are in the early stages of developing that framework, and as Graham said, there's workshops to come, but they will be involved. But essentially that forum will be for the justice matters, and then that will feed up into the CYPS Child Protection Group, of which Department of Health co-chair, and all the trusts sit on that. So it feeds into that wider cross-departmental strategic approach. So most definitely social services are a key partner in that.
Okay, thank you.
Can I ask
Sorry,
go on
I'm
ahead.
just going to pick up a point on, 2 points really. If a child comes to our attention as a suspect, I think we must be always alive to the fact that they are potentially one of the most vulnerable because of the very nature of the fact that they are a suspect at such a young age. So the wider kind of missing episodes, or antisocial behaviour, all those wider community and environmental living factors need to come into play. So I think in terms of social services, when a child is identified as a suspect, it is an absolute statutory duty for police to kind of engage with social services and make that assessment. So we would always refer, but then we have, in terms of parental responsibility, we would be picking up on things like you always keeping that kind of professional curiosity and that investigative mindset in terms of are there neglect, are there cruelty issues within the home, and wider offences that are affecting the child, then the outworkings in terms of actually developing into criminal behaviour.
Colleen, you keep emphasising local children. What other classification of children is there?
UK or Irish children, Irish nationals, UK or Irish nationals, because the Home Office NRM statistics will break it down. So I think there was 86 children overall. Yeah, so 86 children were referred to the NRM in 2025, and 24 of those 86 were UK or Irish nationals. So the rest would have been children from different countries who have maybe been trafficked into the country, and that's why there's been an NRM referral, or maybe been brought here to be exploited, and then there's been an NRM referral.
Okay, thank you. Emma?
Thanks, Chair, and thanks to you all for the presentation. I want to go back on some of the points that Connie had made, because I think I had the exact same assessment of the report, in that it painted a pretty dire picture. And obviously the testimony that you've provided today would suggest that there have been some changes since that, and that things have improved. And I know that like one of the more we've had two incidences in recent times of really alarming examples of how child exploitation wasn't picked up. So I suppose the news that we got last week around the Katie Simpson case sort of demonstrated a catalogue of errors, and how, you know, there were multiple statutory agencies and services that didn't ask questions or identify where there was risk to a young person, and just that sort of lack of instinct that you would hope would be there around some of the both, you know, PSNI and the health service and all of those different actors. There was also details revealed around the so-called race riots in Ballymena last summer, where FOA requests revealed that during some of the meetings that were held in the wake of those, there was identification that CCE had probably played a factor, but there were no referrals to the National Service after that. Can I ask what the rationale for that was?
Well, Diane, yeah, and again, just to be absolutely clear, so there was 33 juveniles, as I understand, that were subject to interventions by police in respect of the Ballymena riots, and 33 juveniles were referred through the mechanisms in terms of social services, etc. And that's the point I made earlier around, you know, we are considering safeguarding, we are making those referrals to social services and other partners, we are considering the impacts of safeguarding, etc. Those referrals were not made through the NRM mechanism, because of that specific evidence around that more modern slavery, human trafficking element specific to the NRM mechanism. So I think we are better aligned now to address that, but I just want to reassure the committee that that is not us dealing with those juveniles and not making referrals or not considering their safeguarding. You know, the 33 referrals were made to social services in terms of those people.
Okay, so you would say that referring them to the national mechanism wasn't the appropriate pathway for those particular
on the
individuals?
Evidence of those particular cases, yes.
So you would have referred them to social services, and then
safeguarding would have been addressed through that mechanism.
Okay, and you're content that well,
maybe content's not the right word. Always open to challenge around that, always open to improvement in terms of how we do that work. But I just want to reassure the committee that this was not a case of us considering the safeguarding of those people in the wider sense. That was considered, and referrals were made to what we deemed at that time was the appropriate avenue to make those referrals.
And so just pick up on the point around timelines. So the National Referral Mechanism pilot only commenced in January of this year, where we have previously had a different process in reporting directly through the NRMs to the Home Office. That has moved now to a more local focus, which is really welcomed. So at the time, there wouldn't have been the same criteria or mindset applied to that specific case that you're speaking to around the public disorder at the time. But I think we were very clear in terms of calling that out, because we did identify it. This is criminal exploitation in terms of public disorder, and children being encouraged to engage in that type of behaviour.
So I think that there are nearly two, almost twin track problems playing out here in what we've seen identified by the report and some of the cases that we've seen in the public domain. So the report that was released last Tuesday around Katie Simpson's murder identified that there was, institutional misogyny, that there was a lack of investigative sort of thinking from some of the statutory agencies that were faced with Katie as a victim and that weren't asking questions that they really should have been asking. And then the report tells us that that there was no effective system in place to track cases of CCA or measure the level of it. my question would be, do you think that those attitudes still exist, and is the pilot sufficient to address, bringing forward the system, and is that having the appropriate or necessary impact on the attitudes that are there?
I would say there's a number of factors that are addressing those attitudinal factors that you've mentioned there. We have done significant work in terms of our training, both in respect of investigative mindset, but also in terms of the understanding of CCE and CSE more widely. But also I'm conscious that we're now into year 4 of our Violence Against Women and Girls Action Plan. We are utilising the recommendations from a range of reports, including the report into Katie Simpson's terrible murder, to inform that plan moving forward for the next 3 years. And certainly we are committed to addressing all of those areas of concern and ensuring that we use that as a real learning opportunity to move on and provide a much better service to all victims, regardless of who they are, age, etc., and to pick up on those very valid and very clear areas where we did not perform the way we should have. Absolutely.
I think we do have to acknowledge those recommendations from the Katie Simpson review, and we will be working with Jan Melia and the department in terms of the implementation stage of them now over the next 12 months, as well as the recommendations that are specific to us in this particular report. But I think you're right. It does make for uncomfortable and difficult reading. We completely acknowledge that. But these are the things that keep us on our toes, that kind of the catalyst for organisational learning and improvement, and absolutely that's exactly where we are within the organisation in terms of our focus.
Okay, Brian, you want to end a quick thing on a point Emma made, or you want to wait till the end? Was it on a point Emma made?
No, not specifically on Emma.
Leave you the last then? Yeah. Okay, Morris.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you very much for your presentation. It was alluded to earlier that no legislation currently exists. So, given if that's correct, what specific steps are being taken to ensure that PSNI recognises child criminal exploitation beyond county lines and beyond, as was alluded to there a few minutes ago, countries, particularly where paramilitaries and organised crime groups are involved?
Well, again, just to emphasise again, we're absolutely committed to protecting children first and foremost, and we are taking these issues seriously. We have implemented a range of issues very quickly in response to this report, and that has included the acceptance of the definition, enhanced data recording, amendments to the prosecutorial documentation that Elish has talked about, enhanced flags, enhanced accountability through the policing board. And we're working with our partners both here and external to that through the Safeguarding Board Northern Ireland, academic partners again that has been mentioned by Zoe, and training. Training is a key element in this, but Zoe may want to highlight some
They're
other
all the
issues.
features of the strategic delivery group that I'm running, and it's at a goal level. It's cross department within the organisation, because I want to be very clear that this isn't just a public protection branch matter. It is owned by the whole of the organisation, from frontline officers right through to some of our forensic specialists in some cases. So we're very alive to that, and we have a plan for delivery, and some of those that ACC Beck has described are the key pieces of work that we're focusing on.
So some of those plans include the introduction of legislation to support the work that you're doing.
That's the work that
yeah. One more question. We talked a lot about paramilitary intimidation and organised crime, but how is information collated in relation to the provisional IRA, who I believe are not monitored by the PSNI, and including all other paramilitary organisations that still exist? Are there links between paramilitary groups and organised crime sharing child exploitation?
Certainly what I would say, Chair, is that we will address all criminality wherever it comes from, and wherever the source of that may be. In terms of organised crime, gangs and paramilitarism across Northern Ireland, we currently have 48 groups under investigation, which is an increase on where we were this time last year of around 6 additional groups. We have conducted in the region of just under 400, around 391 disruptions to those groups over the last year. In terms of paramilitary groups, they make up about 17% of those 48 groups. And what I would say is, in terms of our efforts to address criminality in that regard, the value of drugs that we have seized in respect of coming from paramilitary groups is up. Our cash seizures are up, our arrests are up, and the number of persons that we have charged and reported in respect of those groups with links to paramilitary groups is up. And across all those organised crime gangs, again, our arrests are increasing, our seizure of weapons and firearms is increasing, our safeguarding, which is key to today's discussion, is increasing. So we're working really, really hard, extremely hard, day and night, to address all criminality by whatever group they may or may not come from, irrespective of the community that they impact. And that's where the impact is felt most. These groups are having continued coercive control across those communities, and we are committed to doing everything we can to address that.
Yeah, through you, Chair. But the PSNI are not monitoring the provisional IRA. Is my understanding that has been done by the security forces in the mainland. Do the security forces in the mainland share information with the PSNI in regards to that particular paramilitary group?
What I would say, Chair, is we monitor all areas of potential offending, and we will address all areas, and we work very closely with our partners both here in Northern Ireland, in GB, and indeed in partners in Garda Síochána, very closely with all those partners.
Very political answer. You should be a politician.
Thank you.
Thank you, Chair.
Doug Beattie.
Chair, thank you. Team, thank you for your answers so far. Can I just ask, the core concept of CCE is coercion into crime, an individual or group taking advantage of an imbalance of power to coerce, control, manipulate or deceive a person under 18. What do we do when the person who's doing the exploitation is under 18?
Great question. I think we also need to say it's child abuse first and foremost. What do we do when a child is under 18? We kick in all of our statutory obligations in terms of child protection, regardless of the incident or the specific circumstances, because we have, as a sort of partner and collective, we all have our own sort of statutory obligations there. So if there's any concerns, we will make the appropriate referrals, we will have the appropriate case discussions, we will do joint investigations, and then we will signpost to appropriate partners. I think in terms of, you then need to consider, age of criminal responsibility, and then you get into a lot of other issues and debates around under 18s. But I think first and foremost, we need to safeguard those people, because we've said it is safeguarding first and enforcement thereafter. Because we know, and I think I'm just repeating what I've already said, these are the most vulnerable people, and they deserve and need our additional collective response and protection.
Yeah, I kind of get that, and look, it's easy to say that, but I don't see that with a 17-year-old who's exploiting a 12-year-old. That 17-year-old is the victim of this if they're doing the exploiting. So I'm not quite getting that side of things. And you cannot give a prevention order to somebody under the age of 18. So we can't give a prevention order to that person at the age of 17. Just remember Alexander McCartney. He started his litany of offences at the age of 14. And that went on till he was about 26, and look what happened in regards to that. So the question kind of still stands. What do we actually do? How do we stop that exploitation? Because we all know that a lot of that exploitation now can be done remotely, can be done online. So somebody at the age of 17 can sit and exploit and coerce somebody into crime over the internet. And it's really difficult to see what we can do in regards to that.
And the only response, I would say, Doug, certainly we will investigate that criminality. We will discharge our obligations under Section 32 of the Police Act. So we will investigate that irrespective of the age, and we will take that investigation through the measures we've talked about earlier in terms of the youth diversion officer, etc. we will attempt to address the behaviour, to look after the safeguarding, to signpost and signal people and help them along that journey. But ultimately, there are still juvenile courts. We will still prosecute juveniles if that is absolutely necessary and warranted. And I don't know if Elish wants to
all
comment.
I'd really add is, we do get files of that nature that are investigated and submitted to ourselves. There is a youth justice court, and part of the whole youth justice system effectively looks at restorative justice principles, which you were referring to earlier. But ultimately, there are prosecutions that go through the court system, but also a veil of youth diversionary disposals and youth conferences along the restorative lines as well. So we presently have those situations.
And the reality is, many of those offenders will have exhausted all other opportunities multiple times, but we will take them through that process.
And I think to add to that, I think your question actually demonstrates how complex this particular issue is, and there are differences between child criminal exploitation and sexual offending, either contact or non-contact. There are subtle nuances in some of even the example that you've provided there. So I think we also need to see the additional barrier with child criminal exploitation is that a lot of victims do not self-identify as victims. They will see their perpetrators as their protectors, their peers, their providers in some circumstances. And that plays into the imbalance of power. But where there's online offending, either or contact offending from a sexual perspective, we are absolutely in the space of sexual offences prevention orders. And whilst you may not be able to get one for an under 18, there are other ways of managing those types of offenders under the public protection arrangements, despite the fact that they are juveniles.
Yeah, but I suppose, and I'm using an extreme example of Alexander McCartney at the age of 14, but it's a fair example. And if he was 13 and a half, for example, or just 6 weeks younger and was in late 13, under Macker, if it changed to 14, you'd be powerless. Is that right?
In essence, in terms of the criminal justice route, yes. We could still signpost, we could still advise social services, but yes, ultimately we wouldn't have that sanction or ability to consider a criminal prosecution. So it would limit the interventions that are available.
Okay, good enough. Listen, thank you all.
Okay, Doug, thank you. Ciara, on the screen.
Can I thank you all for your presentation today? Just kind of two core areas. One was, and obviously from the report, and as you mentioned, the report was being done whilst improvements were being made during the fieldwork, so I recognise that, and I'd like to acknowledge some of the interventions that has happened quite recently. And many of you mentioned that it's now a key priority across the criminal justice system. So just in relation to training, some have mentioned training has begun. I know there's guidance from the Safeguarding Board, but can you outline the level and the scale and the investment of the training that is currently taking in place to ensure that it is embedded across the criminal justice system? So that would be my first question, please. Thank you.
I can speak on behalf of policing first and foremost, but some of the things that I refer to will be more broad across partners and the criminal justice system. I'll start first with the practitioner guidance from the Safeguarding Board for Northern Ireland. That has been issued and is a absolutely fantastic tool in terms of awareness raising and education and a reference point. We're also developing a toolkit for frontline officers to identify and respond appropriately. That is a work in progress. We are also then revising, and I think ACC Beck has already referenced that, we're revising all of our current training protocols and processes that are well established within the service at foundation level, specialist crime level, and local policing in terms of their day-to-day. Further, their local police or district learning packages, and then we're also developing an e-learning package for rollout across the whole organisation for broader awareness and training. And I know through the newly established forum, that will be a key focus, the training and awareness raising in terms of right across the criminal justice system, because as we started off by saying, this isn't just a policing matter, and we all know that we need to kind of have that wider collective response. So it is part of the training pillar, isn't that right?
Yes.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
I think
And
from
do you have a timeline in relation to it? Because I know it's obviously some in development. So if you have a timeline where you believe it will be fully embedded and fully trained across, for instance, the PSNI, what timelines are we talking?
Within the PSNI, in the existing frameworks that are there, it's already been done. It's being developed. It's already embedded in through say for example, specialist officers doing their child abuse investigation, or the specialist officers in the rape crime units, and they have bespoke detective training courses, and we're introducing child exploitation elements into that. And then also at foundation training, there are bespoke modules that they will cover when they're in the training centre.
On behalf of PPS then, we already have our policy guidance for the prosecution of young people, our guidelines on child safeguarding, our policy on human trafficking and exploitation, and our guidance for prosecuting cases involving child sexual exploitation. So they're all live practical guidance that we continually train our lawyers and our admin staff on, and we continue to work in the child criminal exploitation area as well, and again it will be in addition to this. But again, mentioning the professional curiosity, in which we always have when we approach any file. So embedding that in all our prosecutors and indeed all our staff in PPS. So building on the guidance and the training that we already do with this specific area and the offence, which we'll welcome when it does come.
Okay. Thank you. That just leads me on, Chair, if it's okay, to the second question. Mm-hmm. In relation to the professional curiosity, I know as the public prosecution, you cross the range of areas: vulnerability, adverse childhood experiences, educational, mental health, peers, social influence, family, paramilitaries, etc. So just in relation to the investigative side from the PSNI perspective, I know earlier there in speaking to my colleague, he had mentioned around referrals to social services. Can you kind of further expand on the professional curiosity? And I'm conscious of the range of organisations and services that have knowledge and information in relation to the coercive control of young people in neighbourhoods and communities. So I just wanted to what other organisations and agencies do you avail of?
Okay, and I think you're absolutely right. So whilst as a police service we have significant amounts of information, we don't have all the information, and particularly around some of these core community issues. So for me this absolutely links, and Zoe has mentioned the training from foundation level right through to specialist officers. That's one element of it. I think what we also need to do is raise that awareness in terms of our neighbourhood teams, so that they are also having those discussions, but know how to identify and address some of those issues that they come across, and develop that community network of support. So we have done work through, for example, the Ask for Angela campaign, which was specifically around our VOG action plan, with the nighttime economy, with taxi drivers, with TransLink, etc. So it's continued to build on that. So I don't think any of this should be delivered in isolation. I think there is learning from a range of reports, including Katie Simpson's case, from the Jenny report, from other internal work we have done across the organisation. I think for me there is a risk if you do this piecemeal. So I have already commissioned some work to kind of bring this holistically together in terms of that more holistic development of training, which will continue. I don't think we can do this. Isn't about just doing a one-off training and saying we've it done. Some of this we can do in terms of awareness training, but I think we need to bring in those kind of examples, those real lived examples of cases where we have got it wrong, and embed that as part of our delivery of training right across the PSNI. In terms of our partner organisations, again, I think we need to continue that type of Ask for Angela approach, that we can kind of tailor that bespoke to a number of partners, and certainly the work with Women's Aid is one example of how we can really generate that community level intelligence, information, concerns, that really inform what we do, where we do it, and when we do it. So I think there's a broad range, and I absolutely agree. We need to expand that further than what we do. It's not just about what we in this table do; it's how we can develop that. That's why I think it's important that this is delivered as part of a a framework, and that's the recommendation one, I think, really gets to, that none of us can do this in isolation. It has to be done across us as partners in this table, but also, of course, across education, health, etc., the voluntary sector, absolutely, that we're all collectively feeding into the information pot, which potentially give us the best opportunity to get ahead of some of these issues.
No, that's good, because that's kind of where I want to come to, is the importance of someone whose background's in community development and through family support, and particularly the likes of family support hubs. And I think there's a wealth of knowledge, experience and support in the community sector. And I think when it comes to, you'd mentioned health, education, justice, working on a cross-departmental level, I think the community is a missing link here in relation to being able to support our young people in the communities, and to do that preventative work in relation to coercive control. So that's just the final one then. When you mentioned the new criminal justice forum, it's the criminal justice agencies forum, and obviously they feed into the safeguarding from a health perspective. Is there any thoughts in looking at the wider framework that you may all separately have forums and use linking? I think, is there a way a framework can ensure that the right people are sitting around the right table at the right time in support of our young people, to be honest? Because it seems very weighted, very heavy, very processed. I know it's, but how can we tighten up? How can the criminal justice system obviously work collectively, which is great together, but also work effectively with the other partner organisations who have a key role to play, particularly in safeguarding and supporting our young people from coercive control, exploitation?
I think that's going to be addressed through the recommendation and the framework that's already been established through the strategic group that was mentioned by our justice colleagues at the beginning. But also there's the 2-year CCE action plan, where it's cross-departmental delivery. So I think we're very alive to the fact that it needs to be and have that whole cross-system approach. There's 15 action points on that, and we're a year and a bit in, and I think on track for at least over half of them from recollection. Isn't that right? So I think we're everybody around here and wider partners, statutory, community, voluntary, are all very much alive to the fact that this is a cross system, it is a cross system problem with only cross system solutions.
Specifically on the forum, do you want to?
Yeah, I was just going to say that in terms of the community voluntary sector, we have considered those in the terms of reference for the new Justice Forum for Child Exploitation, and we will be holding workshops with both our statutory partners that are in the membership, and also then extending out to do a workshop with the community voluntary sector, as you said, to ensure that we're getting the right people around the table to scope out what data those organisations have and what that data tells us around child exploitation and how that can affect the justice system and those outcomes, and monitor those. So those workshops are we're hoping to be starting at the end of June, and we're really hoping that the community voluntary sector will also be able to provide us with that child-centred framework and access to the child's voice as well to inform that framework.
Thank you.
And if we remember the work of Safeguarding Board for Northern Ireland, because we cannot forget them, they are they're doing some sterling work in this space as well, and they're representing 21 agencies, statutory agencies, and really pushing forward with a lot of the exploitation work as well.
And there is just to add to that, there is an obvious nexus between the forum, between the SPNI's Child Exploitation Committee. But I do think it is important, and that's why we fully accept Jenny's recommendation. It is important for the justice family to be able to identify the opportunities and constraints across the justice family, and solve those, and then that assists us feed in and objectively into the broader piece, where we sit with health and education and the voluntary sectors, but at least it gives us a real feeling of the landscape of what's going on in justice to be able to inform that argument, that piece.
And just on finally, it's just a point. Basically, I think at that higher level, strategic level, and working across systems, it's critically important as well at that neighbourhood level, to be working at that neighbourhood level, because that's where you're going to be most effective. So that's me. So thank you.
Thank you, Ciara. Can I ask, let me read to Ginny. The Police Service of Northern Ireland's response to missing children did not demonstrate an adequate understanding of the relationship between child exploitation and missing children reports. Many missing episodes were recorded as concerns for safety rather than as missing person reports, and victim blaming language was evident in some reports. There's a clear emphasis there with regards to the missing children's piece within Ginny, a recommendation indeed. How many missing children have we at this present time?
As in right now, this minute, I wouldn't be in a position to answer that, because that literally changes by the hour and literally by the minute. But you know, what I could say to reassure you around that is that in every district and area's sort of daily management meeting, missing persons are a key part of that agenda, and they are reviewed and updates provided in respect of those on a daily basis. You know, we absolutely recognise that elevated vulnerability, you know, particularly around children in care, and that kind of missing aspect as well. And certainly Zoe is also our lead organisationally around missing persons. So for me, that emphasises and blends both our approach to vulnerability, public protection, children, CCA and CASE, and missing persons, because there is, you know, there was mention of a nexus. There is a nexus around those. We recognise that. We recognise that there were some failings and what Ginny found in respect of that, and that was not acceptable, and we addressed that very, very quickly. But I don't know if you want to add anything to that.
Yeah, as soon as that came to our attention, we set up what we would term internally as a gold group, where we had across departmental response to that, because very quickly we realised that there were quick time actions that needed to be addressed. I can update that we have made significant changes in terms of the response times. There's a review of the policies and guidance issued to local officers, but you'll know from the Criminal Justice Inspector, one of the recommendations is specific around the Philomena Protocol and the need for it to reword, which we're also making the changes and amendments on to meet that recommendation.
But again, that needs to be a multi-agency response, yes, as well.
Whilst I know that it would change, it'll be a moving feast with regards to missing children. On average, in any given week, how many children are missing?
Well, I don't have the exact figure, and I wouldn't we can certainly write to you and give you an overview of that, but it is something that varies, and I wouldn't want to give you the wrong information.
No, and I wouldn't expect you to.
And there will be say weekends where there will be peaks and troughs. It will depend on what's happening in local communities. There'll also be low, medium, high risk children, and then the other kind of adult missing persons as well. So I think we're not trying to and I wouldn't want you to give over information you didn't think was accurate or correct. Why I'm asking you the question is there any correlation between that and the people on the national referral mechanism? So if we're looking at 24 people for 2025 on the national referral mechanism, is there a correlation between missing persons and those registered? Potentially, yes. Because we would refer into the national referral mechanism for also child sexual exploitation, and we know from our data and evidence base that it's one of the indicators for missing persons, especially for looked after children. So, yes, there would be correlation.
Right, okay. I'll read on this, Jenny. Case audits revealed that children were often treated as suspects rather than victims, and safeguarding referrals were not always made in a timely manner. We've covered that a wee bit. The voice of the child was largely absent from police and prosecution records sampled, with little evidence that children's experiences, needs of circumstances were considered during investigations. Can you just give me any practical examples of how that is now improved? And what I've just read out there is in the past.
Yeah, and again, to give you some reassurance, so we have a child's and young persons forum and we engage with a range of partners around the children's voice more collectively at a strategic level to challenge us and make sure that the voice is of the child and the young person is heard. This was specific to the response to individual cases, and again, Zoe has led our response in terms of that and implemented work in the early stages of us being kind of made aware, and this was before the publication of the report around these particular issues. So again, if you want to...
Yeah, so practical examples of that to give you some reassurance. When inspectors brought that to our attention very early on in their inspection, we immediately built in and invited inspectors to come along and see how it was happening. So we built in floor walking within CMC, so the call handling centre where the calls are coming into, to make sure that the calls are being dip sampled and scrutinised and the calls are being listened to. We then built in an additional layer where we have the child's sexual exploitation team going in and dip sampling all missing person episodes and use of language and how they are framed. And then we are now developing a better data source. So again, it's back to that kind of like, where do we know where the problems are? And in terms of the timeliness of calls coming in when officers are deployed, how quick that's happening, what the outcomes are, how quickly they're returned to places of safety, are the referrals being made, that is all being now tracked, and we're building that evidence base to give ourselves and more importantly local communities and others the reassurance that we absolutely take this very, very seriously, because any feeling of one child not getting it right runs significant risk, and we're very, very alive to that.
But when you now read current police records, do you see the voice of the child in those records?
I'd like to say that we are getting there. I would be misleading if I didn't say I've seen it in every case, and that is part of the work that we've described here today around sort of embedding and training and bringing it more to the fore, because I think for some officers they might have known that there was something wrong or it just didn't feel right. Some might not have identified it at all, but actually having a clear definition of what child criminal exploitation is has been almost the starting point, and then obviously the accountability from the policing board as well is really driving this work and the focus on it.
What about the PPS? Is there practical?
From the PPS perspective, whilst we didn't have any particular recommendation directed ourselves, clearly we work with our criminal justice partners. The sampling of files due to the lack of data in the CCE arena will mean that in the future it'll be a little bit easier to actually get the files, because we'll have the offence to attribute to it. But what I would say in terms of reassurance is, in terms of youth offending, there's a huge amount of work that goes on with our specialists through to the police, but also the youth justice system per se, and the documenting of that. So again, the queries being made are there on file notes, and I think whenever the data quality issues are clarified, that will be very evident perhaps in future reports.
Okay. Ginny, last one. Resource pressures across the Police Service of Northern Ireland, the Public Prosecution Service for Northern Ireland and Health and Social Care Trust further impacted the system's ability to respond effectively. One of the recommendations states an adequately resourced delivery group. Is it adequately resourced?
Well, I would widen that out and be absolutely frank with the committee in terms of there is a resourcing challenge in terms of PSNI and our ability to respond to all these challenges. Public Protection branch, I think, sort of holds significant risk across the broad range of offending behaviour from children is one aspect that we've talked about today, but right through adult safeguarding, serious sexual offences, domestic violence, violence against women and girls more generally. So when you take that broad range of offending, criminality, risk, potential risk and safeguarding, that's phenomenal, and we don't have the appropriate resource at this minute in time in crime department and in public protection and in the PSNI to address that fully and properly. As a result of that, yes, there is more an increased risk of service failure across these areas, and I'll not shy away from saying that. We have a recovery plan. We have a plan within crime department to regrow that detective status. Today, as we sit here, I'm 265 detectives below the established strength that I should have, and that impacts all right across crime branch, not just public protection branch. but in terms of public protection branch, that's probably sitting around 60 officers today that are below the strength. So that has an impact in our ability to deliver everything we have talked about today. And you as a committee and you as as our political representatives can help us in terms of that regrowth, that resourcing, that we can try to provide the best possible service and safeguard communities right across Northern Ireland.
Okay, thank you. Brian, you want to end for a quick one?
Yep, just wanted to clarify the statistics about national referral mechanism. Referrals, 86, is that right, in 2025?
86 children.
86 children, and 24 of those from the UK and Ireland.
Yeah.
So 62 from outside were foreign national
Nationals,
children,
yeah.
Under 18s,
Yeah.
and they were being referred as potential victims of human
Modern slavery,
trafficking.
human trafficking, child exploitation.
And many of those been for suspected sexual exploitation.
Yeah,
Because I'm
it
a
would be-
member,
it
some of us
would
here in
be a
an
mix.
APG addressing modern slavery, sexual exploitation, and the online advertising,
Yes, I don't have I do have them elsewhere, but I can get down the actual breakdown of statistics, because we do get from the Home Office what the young person was referred for, whether it was labour exploitation, sexual exploitation, so I can get those, but I don't have that finer detail with me today. But yes, it could be a wide variety of human trafficking offence, modern slavery, child exploitation, sexual exploitation, criminal exploitation, to do with drugs. There's lots of different reasons, yeah.
Right. And I mean, from those stats, well, just to clarify, the 24 who are from the UK and Ireland, they were still seen as being trafficked then, is that right?
They would be seen as a victim of either modern slavery,
Right.
human trafficking, child exploitation.
Right,
yeah.
right.
But not necessarily in Northern Ireland.
Some of them might
Some
have
of
been.
that could have been trafficking prior to them arriving here,
Yeah.
and then it's been reported and referred to us now.
Right. No, it's just
Yeah, it is great.
there's it's
Yeah.
the more we hear, it's just shocking what's going on just under the surface, and the scale of this that's happening here. Yeah. Okay. No, I would welcome any statistics.
Yeah.
Happy
Yeah.
happy to write on that, Chair.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, thank
that'd be
you.
helpful.
And maybe if we could follow up on the missing persons, even a snapshot over a period of time.
Do that.
Sure. That's all I would request. Nothing, not trying to.
Not happy to do that.
Yeah, sure. Okay, thank you very much for your time then today. It was very, very good, a very informative session. Thank you. Okay, members, we will move on. And I seek members' agreement for the meeting to move into a closed session to discuss the Minister's update on bringing forward provisions to criminalise aspects of the creation and distribution of non-consensual sexual explicit defect materials. Are members agreed?
Yeah.
Great.
Agreed. Okay, thank you.
Committee Room 30. Sound. 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 Committee Room 30. Signed. 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 Committee Room 30. Sound. 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 Committee Room 30, 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 Sound. Committee Room 30. 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 Sound.
Thank you very much, members, for that. And just to outline an agreement there that we would write back to the Designated Commissioner, Victims of Crime, just to outline that we will have the informal meetings on Thursday 25th of June 2026, and it would be purely focused on what is in the bill. Okay, members? Okay, agenda item number 6 then, Criminal Justice Sentencing Bill, etc. Bill, keep leaving that etc. out for some reason. Raise oral briefing. Can I refer members to page 129 to 342 of the meeting pack for the relevant papers? Can I inform members that the Assembly's Research and Information Service have produced a bill paper on the sentencing bill which provides an overview of the bill. RAISE have also produced a review of costs for the bill which scrutinises key implications of the public purse in relation to the provisions of the bill. Can I inform members that today the committee is receiving a briefing from the research officers who produced these reports. Providing evidence today is Judith Bailey, Research Officer, Catherine Barr, Research Officer, and Nathan Mulholland, Research Officer. You're all very welcome to the committee. Thank you very much. Can I invite you to make an opening statement? Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Chair, for the invite to address the committee this afternoon. I'm Judith Bailey from the Assembly's Research and Information Service, and joining me today are Research Officers Catherine Barr and Nathan Mulholland. Myself and Catherine will talk to the bill paper we've produced on the sentencing bill before passing over to Nathan, who will talk through the key financial considerations associated with the bill. I'm conscious that the committee has had a busy session already today, so we'll try and go through things as swiftly as we can. Members will be aware that the bill was published on the 3rd of March and passed second stage on 16th of March. It is 8 parts, 51 clauses and 7 schedules covering the range of areas outlined on that slide. The paper goes through each of these and provides an overview of the legislative change which the bill would enact, as well as a comparison to the current position in other parts of the United Kingdom and Republic of Ireland where possible. In general terms, it's worth highlighting that sentencing law has continued to evolve and change in these jurisdictions in recent years. Whilst the sentencing bill covers the areas outlined here, the Department commenced a further review of sentencing in January 2026 with plans to look at the existing legislative framework governing good character evidence, serious sexual offences, drug-related offences and Harper's Law, amongst other things. So just to set a bit of context, Northern Ireland's legislative framework for sentencing is largely found in the Criminal Justice Northern Ireland Order 2008. Within this, there are a range of sentencing options, including imprisonment, community orders, fines and discharges. There's a lot more detail on this in your packs at page 152 if you want some more background on this. And judges decide sentences based on applicable legislation alongside guidance issued through a combination of guideline judgments from the Northern Ireland Court of Appeal and sentencing guidance from the Lady Chief Justice's Sentencing Group, which was established in 2010. In terms of the judiciary's approach to determining sentencing in individual cases, judges will have to balance a range of factors. This is not an exhaustive list, but it can include things like the seriousness of the offence, the harm caused to the victim, and the offender's level of culpability, as well as any aggravating or mitigating factors specific to a case. This allows the judge to arrive at what is known as the starting point for the sentence, after which the application of a possible reduction to this figure for any guilty plea can be considered. In terms of the content of the bill, it follows on from a number of public consultations which have been conducted in recent years. So this includes the Department's Sentencing Policy Review, Judge Marinen's review of hate crime legislation, and a piece of work on Charlotte's Law. So turning to part 1 of the bill, this would introduce a clear statement of the purposes and principles of sentencing into statute for the first time in Northern Ireland. So the court must have regard to these, and they're highlighted on the slide there. During the Sentencing Policy Review consultation, the sparing use of punishment as a principle was included as an option, but respondents were divided on this, and it is not included in the bill. A reference to victims of crime has been included in the purposes of sentencing as a specific addition since the consultation. This part of the bill also provides that a court must follow any sentencing guidance which is relevant to an offender's case, unless it is satisfied that it will be contrary to the interest of justice to do so. If the court does not follow relevant guidance, it must state its reasons why. There are very similar purposes of sentencing found in legislation in other parts of the UK. And there's much more detail on this in your packs at page 166. The setup is obviously slightly different in other jurisdictions though, where there's been a shift away from reliance on Court of Appeal judgments with sentencing council models in England and Wales, Scotland and the Republic of Ireland. And these councils develop sentencing guidelines and monitor their use. There are plans to further examine the proposal to provide the Court of Appeal in Northern Ireland with a power to provide sentencing guidance of its own accord as part of the new sentencing review, and so this is not included in the bill as introduced. So looking at part 2 of the bill, these clauses would create a new suspended sentence order for adult offenders which can specify one or more community requirements. A court would be able to include requirements relating to activities, residence, curfews and electronic monitoring within a suspended sentence order. And the bill would also create new unpaid work requirements within Schedule 1. There's a lot more detail around the specifics of this in the paper, but the number of hours of unpaid work must be specified in an order and be between 40 and 240 hours. And this would be supervised by a responsible officer under the authority of the probation board. A suspended sentence order is not to take effect unless an activation event occurs. So at the point of sentencing, a court would be required to explain to an offender in ordinary language their liability if an activation event occurs. And in this scenario, a court must order that the suspended sentence take effect with the original term unaltered, unless this would be unjust. There are also a number of alternative options open to the court, such as substituting a lesser term for the original term or imposing a fine. Nathan will talk shortly about the Department's financial estimations relating to this part of the bill. And I know the Probation Board for Northern Ireland will also be appearing before the committee in the coming weeks to provide more information on this as well. So moving on to part 3 of the bill, which covers mandatory life sentences for adults. As you'll be aware, life sentences are mandatory for murder, which means that no release date will be given by a judge, with offenders receiving a tariff date, which is the earliest date that they may become eligible for consideration for release by the parole commissioners on lifelong licence. The bill places a duty on the court when passing a life sentence to state in open court its reasons for deciding such a sentence and explain the effect of it to the offender. At present, the starting points which are used by judges to determine a tariff are found in case law, and they were recalibrated in the 2024 Court of Appeal case of Whitla. The bill reflects this and includes 2 starting points for adults, so 15 years and 20 years. and a court must state which starting point it's chosen and give reasons for this or provide reasons for any departure. So the Bill's 20-year starting point for exceptionally serious cases would cover a range of case types. So by way of example, it would include the murder of a police officer or prison officer, the murder of 2 or more persons, a murder where the victim and the offender were personally connected under the Domestic Abuse and Civil Proceedings Act, and the murder of a vulnerable person. The full list is in the table at page 196 of your pack. And aggravating and mitigating factors that may be relevant in a murder case can currently be found in case law. The bill, if enacted, would make provision for these in legislation. So aggravating factors that may be relevant under the bill would include, for example, the use of a weapon, concealment or destruction of evidence, and the abuse of a position of trust. Mitigating factors could include age, clear evidence of remorse, and lack of premeditation. So placing these factors in legislation was not specifically consulted on as part of the sentencing review, but the Department has since added these to the bill in an effort to aid public transparency, understanding and expectations of sentencing in murder cases. The bill also includes a regulation making power to allow the Department to amend some of the provisions in this part of the bill, subject to the draft affirmative procedure. So Part 4 of the bill covers the unduly lenient sentence scheme. Members will be aware that under existing legislation, the Director of Public Prosecution's power to refer a case to the Court of Appeal for undue leniency applies to sentences imposed in the Crown Court for offences triable only on indictment, and it also applies to certain hybrid offences which have been specified in a statutory rule made by the Department of Justice. Hybrid offence is one that is punishable on indictment in the Crown Court or on summary conviction in the Magistrates' Court. And according to the Department, around 2/3 of the Crown Court sentences can be referred under existing provisions. So I'd asked the PPS to provide data around the existing scheme, and I received some information quite recently, so this isn't fully reflected in the paper, but a quick look at the data on the number of referrals approved by the Director shows that there are a very small number of these. I've included a few figures on the slide there for the last 5 years to just give a bit of a sense of this. I suppose by way of context, there are around 750 immediate Crown Court custodial sentences per year, and the most recent figures available for 2024 also show that there were just over 1,700 cases disposed through the Crown Court and nearly 29,000 cases disposed through the Magistrates' Court. So the bill would provide that a case falls under the unduly lenient sentence scheme where an offender is convicted on indictment of an offence and sentenced in the Crown Court. This can also apply to an offender convicted on summary trial and sentenced for an offence which is specified in regulations made by the Department using the negative resolution procedure. Replicating existing provision, the circumstances under which a sentence may be unduly lenient are if the judge erred in law as to the sentencing powers available, or the judge failed to impose a sentence required under certain statutory provisions. So it's a very high bar. The existing 28-day time limit for a referral to the Court of Appeal is also included in the bill. The bill also includes provision for the Court of Appeal to be able to quash any sentence and pass a more appropriate sentence on the offender. And the new sentence must be one which the court below had the power to pass originally when dealing with the offender. Once a review by the Court of Appeal has concluded, the bill creates a power for the Director or the offender to whom the sentence relates to refer a point of law of general public importance to the Supreme Court. That's a quick overview of the main provisions in Part 4 of the bill, but members may wish to seek an update on the Department's work in relation to expanding the remit of the Magistrates' Court, given the impact this is likely to have on the unduly lenient sentence scheme. So Part 5 of the bill relates to cases where an offender has been convicted of murder or manslaughter, but the court does not know where the victim's remains were disposed of. And there are basically 3 stages to how this part of the bill would work in practice. The first is the sentencing stage, during which the court is required to pass a sentence that contains an additional custodial period to take account of the non-disclosure, unless this would be contrary to the interests of justice. The additional custodial period must not be less than 30% of the custodial sentence or minimum tariff, depending on the type of sentence imposed by the court. The second stage is the post-sentence stage. So if an offender makes a relevant disclosure which is not rejected by the Department, then the bill would provide a calculation to determine a reduction in the additional custodial period, and this could be up to a maximum of 50%. So I've included the calculation which is in the legislation on the slide there, It does work, and I've included a worked example of it at page 228 of your packs. In the interest of time, I won't talk through it now, but it's there if you want to have a look at how that calculation operates in more detail. And whilst this is likely to only be relevant in a very small number of cases, members may want to consider whether further guidance or information will be provided publicly explaining the operation of this calculation. There's also a regulation making power in this part of the bill in relation to relevant disclosures using the draft affirmative procedure. The third stage within this part of the bill is the parole stage. So this would require the parole commissioners to obtain and consider information relating to a prisoner's non-disclosure when making a public protection decision. So I'm just going to cover the part of the bill on road traffic offences before I hand over to Catherine to cover the statutory aggravators and new offence of assault on a public worker. Members will already be aware that a broad range of driving offences can be found in the Road Traffic Northern Ireland Order 1995. Serious road traffic offences include causing death or grievous bodily injury by dangerous driving or by careless driving when under the influence of drink or drugs. These offences will be tried in the Crown Court, which will undertake an assessment of a defendant's culpability and the magnitude of the harm caused. The bill would increase the maximum penalty for causing death or grievous bodily injury by dangerous driving from 14 to 20 years. It would also increase the maximum penalty for causing death or grievous bodily injury by careless driving when under the influence of drink or drugs from 14 to 20 years. It also seeks to increase the maximum penalty for causing death or grievous bodily injury by driving while disqualified from 6 to 12 months when tried summarily, and this would increase from 2 to 4 years when tried on indictment. The bill would also provide for a maximum sentence for repeat offenders of imprisonment for life in cases where an offender has a previous conviction for an offence of causing death or grievous bodily injury by dangerous driving or careless driving when under the influence of drink or drugs. There are also a number of changes to the minimum disqualification periods for repeat offences, which can be seen on the slide there. I'll not go through them all, but you can see them there on the screen. So I'll finish there on those parts of the bill and hand over to Catherine to talk about the statutory aggravators and new offence of assaulting a public worker.
Thank you, Judith. Go ahead, Catherine.
Thank you. Afternoon, everyone. I'm Catherine Barr, Research Officer for Equalities and Social Justice, and I'll take you through Part 6 of the bill, which relates to particular persons or groups. So following a review by Judge Marnan on hate crime law, which reported in 2020, clauses 33 to 35 introduce a statutory aggravation model in relation to hate crimes. Currently, under legislation from 2004, there's an enhanced sentencing model, which means that if an offender is found guilty of an existing crime, such as, say, assault, the hate element can be considered just at the sentencing stage. In the existing model, an offender either has to demonstrate hostility or be motivated by hostility towards a particular group. Currently, the law covers race, religion, sexual orientation and disability. There have been fairly long-standing concerns that the enhanced sentencing model has been underused. So in this context, Judge Marnan recommended the adoption of a statutory aggravation model, which was accepted by the Department. Clause 33 would keep the same 4 protected groups and the same 2 thresholds of demonstration or motivation and create an aggravated offence. So this would mean that an existing offence like assault could be tried as assault aggravated by hostility. Clause 33.4 sets out how each group is defined and that it would capture those associated with a particular group, so say friends or family. Clause 34 sets out the consequences of aggravation, including that the court has to state on conviction that the offence is aggravated by hostility and take it into account in sentencing. The aggravation will also appear on the offender's criminal record. However, if the basic offence is proven but the aggravation is not, an individual can still be found guilty of the basic offence, so say assault. Notably, the bill doesn't expand the grounds of protection in relation to hate crime, and members may wish to consider that Judge Marnan recommended the inclusion of sex/gender, including transgender identity, age and variations in sex characteristics, as well as a sectarian aggravator. So there's further detail on the protected groups in pages 238 to 250 of your packs. In this context, Clause 35 allows further protected groups to be added by regulations through the draft affirmative procedure. It's important to be clear that Judge Marnin made recommendations on a wide range of issues relating to hate, and the Department has indicated that some of these will be addressed in the forthcoming Victims and Witnesses of Crime Bill. Others will undergo further consultation with the intention of bringing legislation in the next mandate. Then Clause 36 introduces an aggravation by reason of vulnerability, which would operate in a similar way to the hostility aggravation. Currently, vulnerability is referred to in sentencing guidelines, but is not on a statutory basis. The vulnerability aggravator would apply where the victim was a vulnerable person and the offender knew or ought reasonably to have known that fact. A vulnerable person is defined as a person under the age of 18, or a person whose ability to protect him or herself from violence, abuse, neglect or exploitation is significantly impaired through physical or mental disability or illness, old age, or for any other reason. If the fact that a victim was a vulnerable person is an element of the offence, so for instance child sexual abuse, the aggravation wouldn't apply. Members may wish to consider the potential breadth of this definition, which might cover many victims of crime, including crimes where exploiting vulnerability wasn't a motivating factor. And members may also want to consider how this aggravation would interact with other aggravations, so the hostility aggravation and perhaps things like domestic abuse as well. The third issue, Part 6, deals with is public workers. Clause 37 creates a new offence of assaulting a public worker or someone assisting a public worker. A public worker is defined as a person employed or engaged to provide a service to the public, perform a public duty, or deliver a public service. This work can be paid or unpaid. As has been raised in the second stage debate, that's again potentially quite a broad category. On summary conviction, an offender would be liable to imprisonment of 12 months maximum and or a fine or both. On conviction on indictment, imprisonment can be for a maximum of 2 years and or an unlimited fine. So for comparison, for common assault, the Magistrates' Court can impose a sentence of 6 months, while for the Crown Court it's 2 years. Clause 38 provides for statutory aggravation for an offence against a public worker, which again would largely operate similarly to the other two aggravations. However, unlike the other two, it can only be applied to a limited list of basic offences, so that includes things like threats to kill, assault occasioning actual bodily harm, and sexual assault. For other offences outside that list, a court can consider the fact that the offence was committed on a public worker as an aggravating factor when they get to sentencing. The bill would also repeal the existing assault offences against public workers covering police, fire and rescue personnel and ambulance workers. And Part 6 will commence on the order of the Department. So I'll hand over now to Nathan, who'll take you through the financial considerations.
Thank you, Catherine, and good afternoon, committee. The review cost paper, which begins at page 304 of your pack, considers the potential costs associated with the criminal justice, sentencing, etc. bill. Section 1 and 2 of the paper provides background information and details in the bill, which Judith and Catherine have already covered. Therefore, in the interest of time and not repeat what's already been said, I'm going to begin at section 3, which begins at page 315 of the pack. This section notes that the bill should be considered in the context of significant financial pressure across the justice system and wider public sector. Some of these pressures include rising pay and inflation costs, increasing demand for justice services, and the wider executive level funding constraints. Therefore, costs associated with the bill should be considered within these wider public sector funding pressures. So moving on to section 4, which is the potential public purse considerations in relation to the bill. First, the section notes the EFM and the financial effects of the bill section. Notably, the Department states in the EFM at paragraph 90, in terms of financial effects, the bill as a whole will primarily be delivered with existing resource. However, paragraph 91 continues, some provisions will be subject of individual costs and benefits analysis, and which will be requested from the Department of Finance as required and as appropriate. Furthermore, paragraph 92 notes that the introduction of the community requirements as an option for inclusion with suspended sentences is expected to have significant cost implications for the Probation Board for Northern Ireland. As stated in paragraph 91 of the EFM, some provisions will be subject to cost and benefit analysis. Therefore, Ray contacted the Department of Justice seeking further detail on which provisions were being referred to in the EFM. Section 4.2 and Section 4.3 of the paper details the Department's response and other financial considerations. So, starting at section 4.2, which were some general costs associated with the bill. This section outlines that there are cross-cutting costs that affect multiple provisions, including IT system updates and training for justice agencies. The Department considers these to be manageable within existing resources and notes that these would be considered normal line of business changes. However, they will still require budget to be allocated and represent an opportunity cost as resource for implementation could be used elsewhere. Moving to section 4.3, which provides an overview of the potential costs arising from the individual parts of the bill. First, consideration of Part 2 relating to suspended sentences and the community requirements. Based on the information received, this subsection identifies the reform of suspended sentences with community requirements as the most significant cost pressure in the bill that has been identified. The paper details that the introduction of the community requirements attached to substantial additional capacity within this will require additional capacity within the Probation Board for Northern Ireland. The Department has detailed in its response that based on the current caseload data, there are 4,000 cases. Workload could potentially double with almost 4,000 suspended sentences imposed each year, with indicative costs ranging from approximately 3.1 million if a 50% increase in the current workload based on the suspended sentences was to occur, to a 6.25 million increase if 100% of those suspended sentences cases were being referred for community requirement. It should be considered that these costs would be recurring but also subject to uncertainty as they depend on the judicial use of these new powers. The Department has also noted there will be additional setup and enforcement costs which may further increase spending requirements. A figure for these costs has not been identified. In terms of managing these costs, the Department has raised the possibility of a phased rollout for particular types of case initially. The Department has also raised the potential for cost savings with these new sentencing arrangements being linked to reductions in reoffending and consequent reduced prison costs. Moving to Part 4, the unduly lenient sentencing. This subsection explains that expanding the unduly lenient sentence referral scheme is expected to have relatively modest but ongoing financial implications. It notes that while the case numbers are low, training will be required. There will be increased workload for the Public Prosecution Service and courts, and a potential impact on prison numbers, although this is considered minimal, as well as an estimated additional legal aid cost of around £200,000 per year. While the legal aid bill has been quantified, the other points noted would have costs associated with them. For example, any resultant increase in sentence length would create cumulative prison costs over time. It is also assumed that some of the potential costs will be on an annual basis once the bill comes into effect. Part 5 relating to Charlotte's Law. The subsection concludes that the financial impact of Charlotte's Law is likely to be limited due to the very small number of relevant cases. However, the paper considers that any increase in custodial sentence length carries a higher cost per prisoner over the length of a sentence, and the overall financial effects will depend on how the provisions influence offender behaviour. Particularly whether they lead to an increased disclosure of information, which could see cost reducing in terms of the time a prisoner serves, but also for the PSNI in relation to continuing to investigate such cases. Part 6, first looking at the statutory aggravators. This subsection explains that the introduction of statutory aggravators is expected to generate costs associated with IT updates and training, which have already been discussed in the general section. While individual sentence increases may be small, the paper highlights that the cumulative impacts across multiple cases could become financially significant over time, particularly in the context of rising prison costs. And then within Part 6 as well, the offence of assault on a public worker. It is noted that the creation of a new offence is unlikely to increase the total number of convictions, but may lead to slightly longer custodial sentences in some cases. Associated costs relate primarily to training and awareness, and the costs associated with lengthier custodial sentences. While anticipated to be relatively short additional periods, they still would have an additional cost. However, the Department has noted the possibility of minor savings in court processes if a proportion of those cases were to be prosecuted in the Magistrates' Court rather than the Crown Court, although these remain uncertain at the minute. Part 7, looking at the increased maximum penalties for driving offences, the Department considered that increased sentencing for serious driving offences will likely apply to a very small number of cases and therefore have a limited immediate financial impact. However, as previously noted in the paper, even small increases in custodial time contribute to ongoing costs for the prison service. Section 4.4 considers other potential costs relating to the bill that have not been considered in the Department's response to raise. This can be found at Table 5 of your pack, starting at page 335. I would note just some points to consideration from the table. In relation to the community requirements, included in this is also treatment programmes for the treatment of mental conditions, drugs and alcohol dependency. Possible increased numbers could have a financial impact on the Department of Justice and also on the Department of Health if responsible for delivery of such programmes. And secondly, the table notes that across a number of parts of the bill, the potential increase of sentence length is provided for, while considered minimal individually. So each part we've sort of said the Department considered minimal. These will build up if in each case there is an increase in sentence, even if it's a few months for some offences and a few years. But if this is going across multiple different sentences, that will have a cumulative effect that should be considered within the bill. I'll just finish on a section on the use of secondary legislation. This is just a point for the committee to note that there are a number of provisions within the bill will be implemented through secondary legislation, which may introduce additional costs not fully yet identified. It highlights that the type of legislative procedure, affirmative negative resolution, affects the Assembly level of scrutiny. The section also notes that the reliance on secondary legislation can limit detailed scrutiny of policy and financial implications at the primary legislation stage, creating a possibility that elements of the financial impacts may only become clear later after the secondary legislation comes into effect. I will leave it there. Went through that maybe a bit fast, but hopefully it gives you plenty of time for questions for us.
Okay, thank you. Brian, you've indicated.
Okay, thank you, Chair. Just going back to the start, did you say something about good character references?
So that relates to the department launched a further sentencing review in January 2026. And so good character evidence is one of the things that is falling within that review that the department's currently undertaking.
Not in this bill?
No.
Not right.
No,
because we were discussing that earlier. That's not expected to be added to this bill?
No.
Right, okay. Thank you. Right. In terms of the life sentences, one of the things I notice in the actual, is it correct that the life sentences, the actual 12, 15, 20-year terms are in the explanatory and financial memorandum, from what I can see, not actually in the wording of the bill in part 3. Is that correct? Whereas in part 7 for road traffic offences, the actual sentences are in the wording of the bill. I'm just wondering why there's, if I'm correct, why there's that difference, or does it?
The starting points of, on the life sentences part of the bill, the starting points are provided in the bill. There are 2 starting points. There's 15 years, which would be for.
Is that the existing sentences, or will this be a reduction? Is the 15 years a reduction? Is the current life sentence 20 years, or what is it?
So currently, the starting points are found within case law. So it's a case that I referenced called Whitla. So that does provide for a 15-year starting point for pretty much all cases involving murder. But then there's a 20-year starting point for exceptionally serious cases. So the bill then reflects that.
That's pretty much current practice anyway, is it? 15 years and 20 years?
That's what's in sort of the existing guideline judgment from the Court of Appeal, and then that is what's reflected in its Schedule A1 of the bill. So you have that exceptionally high starting point of 20 years and then a number of relevant case types that are listed. So I think I mentioned some of them when I talked about it, but the murder of 2 or more persons, the murder of a police officer, a prison officer or a fire and rescue officer, the murder of a vulnerable person, those all fall within, there's a number of other ones as well, but they all fall within the exceptionally high starting point. And then all other cases involving a mandatory life sentence for murder, the starting point is 15 years.
Okay, right, no, I see there, so it's in the schedule?
Yes, it's in the schedule to the bill.
Right,
yeah.
okay, not in the earlier part. Okay, so it's not an actual, it's not a change to current practice, those terms, in terms of 15 years, 20 years?
Yeah, so
it's just
essentially
putting it in legislation.
Yeah, that's
right.
My understanding, I suppose, to kind of bring a bit more sort of transparency and things like that.
Okay. In terms of the aggravators for characteristics, aggravation by hostility, clause 33, you were saying how terms which are not in it currently. So what's the distinction between religious hostility and sectarian? So in first reading I thought, well, that would include sectarian, but I see there in your report they're listed differently by the police.
Yes, so the police statistics separate out sectarian hate crimes when they go through to the court. I think most of the time in practice they're falling under religious. I think there's been concerns raised that some forms of sectarian hate crime might fall between the stools, if you like, up between religion and race. So say, for instance, if it's because of a sports top or some other symbol that somebody's wearing that might not be clearly linked to religion, but in our context we understand perhaps what it means, and it's that gap that some people feel should be filled.
And would the religious category mean non-Christian religions, or would that sometimes include issues where it's Protestant Catholic, most likely?
Well, at the minute, because there isn't a separate sectarian aggravator, it would include that, or if there was somebody from a different religion or no religion who had committed a crime because somebody was a Christian, that would be included within that. It's symmetrical, if you like. Every religious group's protected.
But to go back, my question is then whether if an offence is aggravated by religious hostility, would that apply if someone is attacked in a Northern Ireland context because they were Protestant or Catholic, or would it only apply if somebody was Jewish, Hindu, Muslim?
It would apply generally. So say if somebody's attacked because of their religious background, that would, whether it be Protestant or Catholic or anything else, that would clearly fall within that aggravator. I suppose that the question mark and what Judge Marnin raised was around those cases where, in our context, it's maybe more community background, and it's not, it might be people who never go to church, but they're seen as belonging to one community or another, and it's capturing those ones. In practice, my understanding is that if those go to court, it's generally under the religious aggravator.
Right. So, in practice, there would be an aggravator for that, for what we would see as sectarian motivation.
Yeah, but there is, as I say, a concern that it's not clear enough. Right. I don't think there's evidence that there's large numbers of sectarian crimes happening that are going to court, and there's issues that hasn't been raised, but Judge Marnin felt that it was something that could be clarified.
Okay. Last question, I'm trying to find the right section, on the defence of attacks on public workers. So which section is that?
There's 38 and 39.
Yep. So again, this is an aggravator on an existing offence. There has to be another offence, such as threat to kill, wounding with intent, malicious wounding, administering poison, causing bodily injury by explosives, using explosives, occasioning actual bodily harm. So a threat of violence isn't there. So I'm just wondering if someone threatens a public worker, which would be at one scale of it, so somebody working in a shop, a bus driver, a police officer, if somebody makes a threat of violence, as things are worded, would the aggravator not apply, or would it apply?
It wouldn't seem to. Now, there may be, I'm not sure, it maybe depends on the circumstances of what exactly has happened, whether a crime has been committed what crime is being committed there at all. If a crime is being committed, potentially that could fall under, say, assault, that would then be, there's the separate offence relating to assault then. Yeah. If it doesn't fall into that list and it's not falling into that assault on a public worker, that new offence, there's at clause 38.6 allows for the fact that it's attack on a public worker to still be treated as a factor increasing the seriousness at sentencing stage. So it's not an aggravation, but it could still be considered by the court when you get to sentencing, is my understanding.
Offence is not listed in the subsection 3, right? Yeah. Okay. No, just I wouldn't want. It says threats to kill, and then you end up in a debate. Well, he didn't threaten to kill me, but he threatened to punch me, or something like that. That it should still apply as an aggravator in circumstances where there's a direct threat of violence. You're saying that clause 6 might cover that.
Yeah. So if that, I'm just not sure if that threat of violence that would be covered by another law. So I wouldn't want to assume where that is. But if that was illegal, and there was a criminal act there, it could be considered at sentencing stage.
Okay. Well, I'll check that with the department. So one last question, Chair. What on the costs? So. So in the EFM, financial effects of the bill, in terms of financial effects, the bill as a whole will primarily be delivered within existing resources. So, my reading of the bill is overall will be an increase in sentencing.
That's the consideration I've been raising throughout, that any increase in sentencing, so I have the figure within the 57,000 per year per prisoner. Now, there are bits to that about what that entirely entails. There's building costs and stuff that are consumed within that. But that was one of the last points I was making there, is there will, from my perspective, if you increase it, now again, these are from an economic point of view, demand-led services, so it depends on the numbers of convictions and the implementation. As I say, some of these, how many, for example, with the community requirements, how many judges choose to use that power to and put a community requirement on an individual. But if this goes as, say here, with individuals who are already committing crime and then their sentence is increased, that's the sort of the point that I've been raising, is that there is always cost to keeping somebody longer in prison. No matter if it's 6 months, a year, 5 years, there's a cost to do that, and those have to be considered. Now, the department has highlighted that in certain cases, in terms of the community requirement, there would be a hope and expectation that things would reduce reoffending and reduce people going re-entering the prison system, and therefore there could be reduction of costs there. And within other elements of the bill that I've highlighted, there may be cost saving developing from that. But as it reads now, any person being convicted and their sentence being increased, I can see that being an additional cost to the service, whether there is offset later. And again, I would see that any offset or any kind of cost saving would be sort of down system, because it'll take time for those kind of savings to come to the fore if they do emerge from this.
Yeah. No, we would all desire to see crime reduced and the need for sentencing to reduce, but I don't see any sentencing periods being reduced in the bill. So I would concern from a point of view of how they can stand over that statement, that the bill will primarily be delivered within existing resources. But then it's something for us to challenge them on. Okay, thank you.
Okay, Brian, no other member is indicated to ask questions. Can I just ask the question, there's blue boxes within the raised papers whereby we may wish to ask the department questions. Are members content that we harvest all those out of the raised papers and we then send those to the department for as questions and seek answers?
Yeah.
Is that members content?
Great.
There'll be ones that maybe just explore more rather than ask specific questions of the department, but the ones that specifically ask questions, are we content? Okay. Thank you very much then for your presentation and of course your work on actually doing the research. We thank you very much for that, and that will form the basis for us going forward here in research and in scrutinising this bill. So thank you very much for your efforts and your work.
Thank you.
Okay. Members, moving on. Time's moving on. So agenda item number 7 then, criminal justice, sentencing, etc. Bill, written papers. Am I right? Continued. Can I inform members that the committee has received several responses to the call for evidence on the sentencing bill? 7.1 Community Restorative Justice Ireland and Northern Ireland Alternatives. Can I refer members to page 344 of the meeting pack? Can I inform members that the Community Restorative Justice Ireland and Northern Ireland Alternatives have provided a joint response to the call for evidence? The response includes a call for restorative justice to be formally embedded as a processed sentencing disposal using accredited community-based mechanisms to ensure offenders understand, engage with and take responsibility for repairing harm. The committee has been urged to expand the scope of community requirements to include restorative conferencing, trauma-informed interventions, victim impact work and education and employment support, thereby reducing reliance on short custodial sentences that often exacerbate recidivism. Can I ask members if they are content to note the paper at this time and consider further once the committee's call for evidence on the bill has closed? Yeah, we'll go through these. I think 7.2 Derry Strabane PCSP. Refer members to page 357, which contains a response to the committee's call for evidence on the sentencing bill from the Derry and Strabane Policing and Community Safety Partnership. The organisation broadly welcomes the provisions of the bill and emphasises a number of points for consideration. Can I ask members if they are content to note the paper at this time and to consider further once the committee's call for evidence on the bill has closed? Agreed. 3.7 is NICI response for call to evidence. Refer members to page 363. Which contains a response from the Northern Ireland Commissioner for Children and Young People. NICI advised that in the response that though they are not able to provide advice on the detail of the legislative proposals contained within the bill, due to resource pressures, they would draw the committee's attention to a number of key children's rights principles to support their consideration and scrutiny. So can I ask members if they're content to note the paper at this time and consider further? Okay. 7.4 J. Dorian and S. Corrigan on Charlotte's Law. Can I inform members that the committee has received correspondence at page 370 from the sisters of Lisa Dorian and Charlotte Murray requesting an opportunity to provide oral evidence to the committee in relation to the Criminal Justice Sentencing Etc. Bill and specifically the provisions concerning Charlotte's Law. They represent families who continue to walk through the devastating impact of unresolved cases, withheld information and the long pursuit of truth and justice, and they believe that their lived experiences can provide valuable insight into the importance and practical implications of this legislation for victims' families. So can I ask members if they're content that the committee receives oral evidence from Joanne Dorian and Sinead Corrigan at an appropriate time in its hearing? Is that okay? Obviously. Okay. 7.5 J. McConnell, Jade's Law. Now refer members to page 371 of the meeting pack, which contains a correspondence from an individual requesting the provisions for Jade's Law to be included in the sentencing bill. The individual advises that they have over 10,000 signatures in support of such legislation. Can I remind members that the committee recently considered correspondence from the Minister of Finance advising that his officials have been tasked to undertake the necessary policy development with a view to bringing this legislation at the beginning of the next mandate. So, at this stage then, can I seek agreement to forward a copy of the Finance Minister's correspondence to the individual for information and also to those individuals who previously wrote to the committee on this issue?
Yeah.
Content? 7.6 Belfast City Council call for evidence, an extension request. Can I inform members that the committee has received a request from Belfast City Council for an extension to allow it to submit a response to the call for evidence on the sentencing bill beyond the closing date due to its internal processes. So can I seek members' agreement to allow Belfast City Council to submit its formal response after the response has had an it has had an opportunity to be ratified by the full council on the 1st of June. It's just the weekly or monthly 6 weekly cycle. Agenda item number 8, SL1, the Justice 2011 Act Amendment of Schedule 3, Order Northern Ireland 2026. So can I refer members to page 373 to 383 of the meeting pack for the relevant papers? Can I inform members that the Department of Justice proposes to make a statutory rule under powers conferred by Section 35(4) of the Justice Act Northern Ireland 2011. The rule seeks to amend Schedule 3 of the Justice Act Northern Ireland 2011 to update references to football bodies, championships and leagues in relation to regulated matches for the purposes of Part 4 of the Justice Act Northern Ireland 2011. Can I inform members that the rule will be subject to the negative resolution procedure, and it is proposed that the rule will come into operation as soon as possible and prior to the start of the new football season. So can I ask members if they are content that in line with the new processes, the committee issues a call for views on the proposed statutory rule using the standard survey, that we publish the SL1 and the draft copy of the proposed statutory rule on the committee's website, and that we consider the proposed statutory rule at a suitable meeting in June 2026. So can I ask members if they're content with that? Okay, it's in line with the new process. Agreed? Agreed. So then can I seek members' agreement to request the views of the Committee for Communities on the proposed rule, given that the Department of Communities has responsibility for the policy provisions in the 2011 Act. Members agreed? Okay.
I wonder, should we ask the department as well if there are any other legal implications from these inconsistencies that we maybe hadn't, like our previous convictions are still valid, or what are the implications of this?
Okay, yeah. You content? Yeah, agreed then. Members agreed? Yeah. Agenda item number 9 then is improving health within the criminal justice strategy, proposed way forward. Department of Justice written paper. Can I refer members to page 384 to 398 of the meeting pack? Can I inform members that the Department of Justice has provided the committee with an update on the outcome of discussions between the Department of Justice and Health on the way forward for improving health within the criminal justice following the expiry of the strategy and the action plan. Can I remind members that the strategy was published in 2019 and was supported by a 5-year framework and an initial 3-year action plan containing 45 actions across 7 priorities. However, delivery was significantly affected by challenges including the absence of the executive, the COVID-19 pandemic, resource pressures and competing priorities such as responses to critical inspection reports. Although the action plan was extended to June 2023, work to refresh it was delayed due to resource constraints, particularly within the Department of Health. A progress report published in 2025 highlighted both achievements and ongoing gaps. Can I inform members that the Department's paper advises that subsequent efforts to develop a new action plan found limited scope for additional deliverable actions, given existing workloads, financial pressures and overlapping initiatives? Both Justice and Health officials concluded that many relevant activities were already being advanced through other strategies and programmes. And as a result, both departments agreed that a new standalone strategy or action plan is no longer necessary. Instead, a collaborative matrix has been developed to map ongoing joint work and governance arrangements, demonstrating that improving health outcomes within the justice system is now embedded in routine cross-departmental activities. So can I ask members if they are content to note the paper or if any other further information or clarification is required at this time?
Noted.
Okay, happy enough. I just want to say that there was a period where there was a lot of incidents within our prisons, and they seem to happen very, very often, some with catastrophic impacts and outcomes for people's health and well-being. That thankfully hasn't been the case of late, so hopefully that continues. I'm not saying it's down to the strategy or anything like that, but I think we should be mindful that when they have stopped this joint work and they are progressing other means and other ways and using other vehicles, that hopefully that good record of late will continue. I think we'll leave it there. Okay, members? Agenda item number 10 then is correspondence. Can I inform members that there is a correspondence memo on 12 items of correspondence at page 399 to 529 of the meeting pack and pages 3 to 66 of the table pack. Can I advise members that I will draw their attention to 6 of the items, and then members will have the opportunity to comment on others. 10.2, can I refer members to page 402, which contains the Department of Justice response to a number of follow-up relating to the Department's response to the independent review of the Northern Ireland Policing Board. Can I inform members that the Department has advised on ongoing work with the Policing Board and the PSNI to finalise a number of matters relating to the Injury on Duty Scheme and ill health retirement, and that legislative provision to transfer these schemes from the Policing Board to the PSNI cannot be brought until that work is completed. In addition, work on this area has slowed due to resource pressures and other work priorities. So can I seek members' agreement to request that the committee is kept informed on the finalised agreed position on which IOD and ill health retirements will sit? Agreed? Yep. 10.3 and 10.4, can I refer members to page 406, which contains a response from the Department of Justice to a number of questions raised with the committee by an individual in relation to support for litigants in person, including support for self-litigants with disabilities. Can I inform members that the Department has advised that it is taking steps to improve transparency and that's a new one there.
Navigability.
Yeah, that's great. Can you say that?
Navigability.
Of the system. I'm just going to leave that one. I'm going to shirk that one. Including sponsorship of an online information repository for parties to family proceedings, steps to transfer this material to the Department's website and to further develop it to enhance the range of information to assist litigants in person are expected to complete within the coming months. The response also outlines a number of ways in which the Department is working with the Equality Commission to address issues of physical accessibility and promote positive attitudes and encourage participation of disabled persons in public life. Additionally, the committee has also received further correspondence at item 10.4 from the individual who raised the matter with the committee to advise that they would be willing to provide oral evidence to members on the matter should the committee believe it would be of benefit to hear such evidence. So can I seek members' agreement to forward the Department's response to the individual who raised the questions with the committee?
Agreed.
Are members content then just to note the Department's response?
Content.
Okay. 10.6 then, can I refer members to page 421 to 423 of the meeting package, which contains a correspondence from a KC who has contacted the committee in a personal capacity to request the committee's support in advancing legislative reform in the context of financial remedy proceedings. Connie, you want to come in on this one?
Yes, if that's okay. Just to declare on the outset, I have met the individual, the barrister who has written to us around this proposal, and just to offer my support to say I think there's been a lot of work that's gone into this. There's clear examples of where this works in other jurisdictions, and it's a real practical legislative way that we could actually improve court proceedings for victims of domestic abuse. So it's something that I think I'm really interested in, and it would really hope the committee could ask the department around and put its weight behind also. Okay, so you've heard from Connie there, members. So can I seek agreement to forward correspondence to the Department of Justice and the Department of Finance for a response? Thank you.
Agreed.
Okay, agreed. 10.9, can I refer members to page 485 of the meeting pack, which contains correspondence from an individual to the Education Committee in relation to the prosecution of parents of SEN, autistic and disabled children for alleged school non-attendance, which was forwarded by Connie for the committee's consideration. Can I seek members' views on whether there is any action that we wish to take on this issue? We can push it to the department to see.
Chair, I think just
asking
at the end to make sure the Justice Minister is aware, so it could even just be forwarding it to the Department for Information.
Yeah, okay. Are members content with that?
I mean, do also send it to Education Committee or?
Through you, Chair, the Education Committee have it already, so I've been in contact with the clerk about it, so that they considered it, I think, yesterday.
And what was their
I haven't actually had a chance to speak to her about the outcome, but she was asking, just had let me know that they had it too.
I mean, I'm aware of a number of cases where children are, for whatever reason, not going to school, including school refusers due to anxiety and so on. I haven't heard of any been prosecuted, so if we get the statistics anyway from the department, ask how many cases there have been where there has been prosecution of parents. I know there's a statutory obligation, for children to attend school and for parents to ensure that where possible. But anyway, I'd be interested in the statistics, how many cases have resulted in prosecutions.
Yeah, I would be interested in that too. You've triggered me now. Just to let you know that numbers of children missing out in school for more than 50% and 80% of time doubled after lockdown. So, just so you know.
Can I just say, because I'm aware of a situation whereby a child who not presenting with special educational needs but with anxiety issues resulting from a trauma, where this reference to potential court proceedings were made by the welfare officer. And my understanding is that that should only happen when there has been a protracted length of time with no engagement from parents. But this particular example, the parents have done everything possible in their care, and a family where the child is well looked about and well loved and engaged with CAMS and all the rest of it. So I think we have to make sure that there's compassion and empathy shown here from all services, and that the EA are dealing with these people in a way that is empathetic.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's really difficult for schools to deal with this, especially when they don't get to see the child very often in school set up. So, these children are in many ways left behind with no help or support for the pupils and the parents. And I've been dealing with a number whereby we've had meetings in school and some of the teachers don't even realise just how severe some of the health conditions are, yet the parents are at home with that on a daily basis.
Well, no, and in the cases I've dealt with, the parents are doing all they can, to persuade the child, but the child is, they just said the child, it's just beyond them, at the moment, and either because of the numbers, and then obviously they try to find community-based solutions and so on in smaller settings. I think generally that is the focus, to try and find something appropriate, and work being sent home. But anyway, no, I'd be interested in the statistics anyway.
Okay.
During lockdown, a lot of children lost their routine, and have had great difficulty getting back into the swing of things. So there has to be a sympathetic.
Yeah, and also the deployment of fear completely destroyed them, and with regards to the conditioning that brought. Anyway, we'll leave it there before I go on too far. 10.11, refer members to page 457 to 529 of the meeting pack and pages 3 to 6 of the tabled pack, which contains a submission from an individual regarding the absence of accountability mechanisms for the President of the Industrial Tribunals and Fair Employment Tribunal in Northern Ireland. The submission concludes that a number of requests to the committee, and the individual has offered to provide all evidence to the committee on the matter should members believe it would be of benefit to do so. So can I seek members' agreement to request the views of the Minister of Justice and the Lady Chief Justice on the points raised regarding the accountability mechanisms for tribunal judiciary, and that will be of course subject to the individual's consent. Are members agreed? Okay, are members agreed? Can I ask if members are content to note the other items, or if any other member wants to raise anything in the correspondence part? Okay, agenda item number 11 then is forward work programme. Can I inform members that the latest draft of the committee's forward work programme can be found at pages 531 to 539 of the meeting pack? Can I inform members that the concurrent meeting with the Committee for the Executive Office on the Police Ombudsman's report on the abuse of possession of sexual purposes by PSNI officers is now scheduled to take place on Tuesday the 30th of June and not on the 2nd of June as previously proposed, as some witnesses are no longer available on the 2nd of June. So can I seek members' agreement to note the latest draft of the Committee's forward work programme? Agreed?
So it's Tuesday the 30th at 9:30 still? or what
It
time?
would be at the same time, Chair. Yeah.
9:30.
And not on the 2nd?
Not on the 2nd.
Okay, agenda item number 12 is chairperson's business. I can advise I have no chairperson's business. Agenda item number 13, any other business? Does any other member wants to raise anything? If not, then agenda item number 14, date, time and place of next meeting, which will take place on Thursday the 21st of May 2026 at 2 p.m. in room 30 Parliament Buildings. I adjourn the meeting.
Committee room 30. Sound. 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 Committee room 30.